to be episode 16 of the Help Action video series, where we have a guest on to talk about a certain topic, interview them, have a little bit of Q&A. And tonight, we are going to be talking about teaching the game as far as role-playing games go. And I couldn't be happier to have the guest that I have tonight, Mr. Nate Vanderzee. So, Nate, how are you, son of a bitch?
I'm doing great. Thank you.
Excellent. Why don't you tell the people who you are, where you come from, where they can find you, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, so I have a YouTube channel called WASD20. That's probably the biggest thing. And I talk about tabletop RPGs and fantasy maps. And yeah, I have been playing Dungeons and Dragons and I guess RPGs in general. I think my first was actually Pathfinder, but for about 5 years now. Right before 5th edition came out, I started playing Pathfinder. Excuse me. And I've been drawing maps almost that long as well. And I do that. I do commission work. So I operate under the name Sellsword Maps. And I'm also a teacher. I teach high school. And so I work with kind of trying to combine my loves of RPGs and in teaching, and managed to find several ways to do that, which is fun.
Which is one of the reasons why I'm very, very happy to have you on as the guest to discuss this particular topic. I think that you'll have a lot of insight and some interesting pointers for us. But one of the things that I kind of always start these off with, and you've touched on it a little bit already, is the when you found the hobby. But what about the how? Like, how did you find the hobby? How did you get into this?
Yeah, I grew up always loving fantasy. My dad read fantasy novels and stuff, and got me into like Narnia and Lord of the Rings and Hobbit and stuff. So there's that. But I never played growing up. Played D&D or other RPGs. But I definitely played a lot of computer RPGs. Was always really into that. And I read D&D novels, actually, growing up. We would go up to the used bookstore and just get these old, 10-year-old musty-smelling RPGs, probably older than that. They were not in great shape always, but they were always cheap, and they always had cool covers, and me and my buddy would pick a bunch of those up and read some of them. and yeah, so it was always kind of this thing that I was around, but never really took off. And in high school, I kind of got out of some of my some of the things that maybe were viewed as nerdier because I wanted to be noticed by girls and wanted to be a basketball star or whatever. So, but eventually I got back into video games and slowly started kind of really after I got married, I think. Isn't that funny how that worked out? Like, hey, I got my wife now. Let me get nerdy again. And eventually that led me to RPGs. I think two things. Maybe I'm getting too long-winded, but sorry. I read Ready Player One, which really enjoyed the book, and just got into a lot of the things it mentioned, including like the band Rush and like all these things that like I'd heard and seen before, but I was like, oh yeah, this is kind of badass. And then I got into RPG shortly after that too. Another book that was influential was the book Masters of Doom, which is about the guys at id Software who made Wolfenstein 3D and Doom, Commander Keen, and they played D&D. And this book kind of documented the early history of their company, and it was a wild story, just lots of ups and downs, conflict and strife and obstacles to overcome. And through it all, they're in a pretty crazy like D&D game that just sounded like, what is this? This is nuts. Because they're game designers and they're like just have these crazy minds. And that was another book. So that and Ready Player One were just like, I gotta check this out. And then I reached out on like a couple Facebook groups, and one of the first to respond was Juice over at Tabletop Game with Juice, or Master the Game. And yeah, went to a couple local game shops. First games I played were in Pathfinder Society and local game shops. And yeah, I got in.
That's awesome. Yeah, like I played a crap ton of Doom back in the day.
Yeah.
Doom and Doom 2 both. I was there whenever the patches came out so that you could actually use a modem to connect to other people's computers and play with each other.
Mm-hmm.
First multiplayer shooter. Yeah, I was all over it in high school and junior high. So it's very much kind of burned into my brain.
Okay, well, you got to read Masters of Doom. You will love it. Yeah. It is one of my favorite books, top 10 books for sure.
That's amazing. And it makes perfect sense that they play D&D. I mean, and that's the kind of thing is like, as you've been a D&D player, like you can easily peg the things in mainstream media that are like, oh yeah, they definitely play D&D. Yeah. Mm-hmm. You watch a movie and you're like, this guy definitely played Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
I love that.
I know, it's great.
So as somebody who's pretty new to the hobby, 5 years is not new as some, but new compared to a lot of others who have been in the hobby for a long time. But since you're somewhat new, what are the things that you found the most helpful whenever you were learning to play? Like, what are the teachable moments, if you will, that kind of really hit home with you?
Yeah, I mean, I think a big part of it is just like learn by doing. That you can teach someone, you can sit them down and talk about it, and you can hand them things to read and videos to watch, some of mine maybe, but really like nothing can replicate just like here's a character sheet, let's just try it. You know, I think that's the most valuable. Yeah. Other things that were helpful for me, I was someone who maybe was a little more apt to like willing to sit down with a big thick book, willing to try to create a character and spend 4 hours creating my first Pathfinder character with multiple trips to like Facebook groups to go, what does this mean? A lot of people aren't willing to do that. So I think that, you know, just show up, play is the best way to go. But yeah, I mean, I think certainly, you know, if there are people, I always recommend, hey, send people some of my videos or some other videos, or, you know, have them watch Critical Role to get a feel for, you know, whatever.
Yeah. I think it's not just coincidence that experience is such a key part of the mechanics of the game.
Yeah.
Because that's really the best way of learning the game. Not earning experience points necessarily, but just experience in general. If you're sitting down at the table and you're paying attention and you're interested in learning, then that's going to be the best way for you to soak up information. Because you might be playing a fighter, but your best friend over there is playing a rogue, and you're paying attention to how he's doing his attack rolls and where he excels in certain scenes and things, and you pick up on that. So that way, whenever your turn comes around to play the rogue, now you have a better understanding of what you're supposed to do, hopefully.
Yeah. No, I think that's true. So yeah, I mean, what did you find helpful when you were first learning?
Truth be told, that was a very long time ago. No, I started playing when I was 14, so that's almost 25 years ago now. And when I first learned to play, we only played twice a year, and it was only for about 3 hours or so. And the game was very focused around what they call Monty Hall dungeoning, where you're just kicking in the doors, killing monsters, getting treasure, leveling up, and just, you know, ad nauseum. There wasn't a lot of character development. A lot of times there wasn't a lot of story development. It was, you know, collect orc ears, bring them back, we'll give you gold.
Yep.
So I loved the game, even from that point on. But it wasn't until college, when I played with a group of theater students, that I really learned kind of what the game was capable of, as far as like the immersion and getting into character and the deep storytelling aspects of it. So I think I already had a pretty good mechanical basis for the game before I really started paying attention to the other aspects of it. Mm-hmm. And that was certainly helpful. But yeah. So one of the talking points that I wanted to discuss is subject matter and language kind of aside, are there different approaches for teaching a role-playing game that depends on the age of the players? Like, do you need a different tact whenever you're coaching adults than you do with teenagers? And what about like younger children?
Yeah. I think a lot of teenagers who want to play D&D are similar to adults probably in some of their willingness to like actually read some rules and figure out the intricacies of character creation and stuff like that. But when you're talking about younger kids, then it's definitely like that's not going to be an option at all, I don't think. I think then it's definitely going to be learned by doing. I do think that, so one of the things to consider when teaching someone to play the game is, do you include character creation? For some, I feel like kids or adults, that is going to be something that is a turnoff if you tell them, I want to play this game, and it's going to take about 3 hours or so. Oh, but then we'll also have to create characters, which will be another hour or two. And especially if you're one DM with 4 new players or something like that, they plan on 2 hours for character creation, probably
with one book.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Yep.
So yeah, I think that's something to ask yourself is, do they have the patience for it? How badly have they been wanting to play, and are they like, man, I really want to play RPGs, I want to get into this looks awesome? Or is it like, hey, I play D&D, and they're like, what's that? And you're like, well, you should come play sometime. And they're like, I don't know. And you're like, oh, come on, it'll be fun. Okay. Like, then that person's maybe you don't want to go full board, like, let's create characters and all that stuff. And I tend to say one of my tactics for new players is often, hey, let's just try it, right? And just a one shot. And then I've done this several times, 3 times, and then you play the one shot, and then afterwards you ask, all right, did you guys have fun? Like, do you want to do this again? Options. We can do it again once in a while. We could play once a month. What do you say? Or once a week. I've never done that, but a lot of groups do. So yeah, those are all things to consider. It's kind of like just more than like what their age is, like how into it are they, and what's going to be the best way to go. And then with young kids, I do think it's something to consider that maybe you don't use D&D 5e or Pathfinder or something like that, but you use a simpler system. Hero Kids, or I got No Thank You Evil right there, which is fun for really young kids and some older kids. Or you kind of homebrew some kind of thing, and just you're playing 5e basically, because that's what a lot of us play, or Pathfinder, or whatever your game of choice is, but you're kind of skipping some rules and making simplifying some things. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, absolutely. I think like I run a game occasionally for my son and my cousin's kids, and we started off with Monster Slayers, I think is what it's called. It was a children's author. I cannot remember her name at the moment, but she put it out kind of low on the radar, but it was like it's on Wizard's site, so it's kind of sanctioned by them. Anyways, and it's very streamlined, very simplistic, but I was able to take it and kind of build on what they presented so that we could continue. And characters have been created since then, and everything kind of in the same vein of what the original package included.
Yeah.
And I think that's a smart way to approach it for first-time gamers, is to have pre-gens available. I was putting together a game for a group of college students who had never played before. It ended up never happening, but I did create a bunch of characters for them. And the way that I went about that was actually asking them, who is somebody from media that you would really want to play? Several of them said, Wonder Woman. One of them said Hagrid. All these different kinds. And I basically just took those and kind of put them through the D&D machine to kind of create a version of them that fit with Dungeons and Dragons. So I think that's the kind of thing that you kind of have to do, is take something that they know and kind of use that as a platform to kind of jump into the actual mechanics of the game.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's great. I think you can do the same thing with setting to some extent, you know. So my brother really likes horror movies. So when we first played, like, I knew, like, oh, I want to run a werewolf werewolf adventure where there's, like, you know, it's a mystery. There's brutal killings in the streets of this city, and, you know, yeah. So playing with what they know.
Absolutely. And I think there's a large part of that happens whenever you're the dungeon master or the game master anyways, is you have to draw on the common language, the knowledge of tropes and cliches, so that you don't have to spend an absurd amount of time going over, you know, everything. You can say, you know, it was a dark and stormy night, and immediately everybody's kind of in the right headspace because we've all seen that and heard that phrase hundreds of times before. We know what it means.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of strength in being able to draw from that, even whenever a player is new to the game. They most likely are not going to be new to the tropes that you call upon.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, in relation to that kids D&D thing you were talking about too, I do remember seeing something like that on Wizard's site a while back, and yeah, something I should look into.
Yeah, it's a. Uh-oh. I don't know what that was. It's lost forever. So yeah, it's very simple, and I think the age range of the kids that I'm playing with now is about 6 or 7 to 10. No, 6 or 7 to 13. 13 is the oldest. So it's definitely decidedly different than the way that I would approach it with a group of teenagers.
Mm-hmm.
I think my son is 10, so he's just now to the point where I'm really kind of entertaining the idea of starting to kind of slowly get him to learn the actual full-blown mechanics of like 5th edition.
Yeah, my son is the same age, my oldest. So yeah, we'll play 5th edition full bore, but it's still a little bit tricky for him to. I mean, he's not really played with a big group too. So when I played with him at a con, like, and he's not the kind who will just like go along with it and be quiet. Like, he's a pretty chatty kid. So he was like, wait, what did you just do? Like to like, you know, the wizard who's like, what is that? What does that spell? Like, huh? Like,
to be fair, I do that too.
Yeah.
I'm like, whoa, what was that?
Yeah. And he's just like, you know, like, yeah, he's just honest and like, and just kind of blunt about like, how does that work? And, you know, like, huh. And just because usually it's just his character she has to know, but now there's all kinds of stuff going on. Anyway, yeah, it's fun. It's a joy to bring people into the hobby, and especially if it's your kid.
Yeah, dude, I love watching him get excited and then run around the house for hours afterwards talking about it or expounding on, like, you know, other things that are all imagination based. I eat it up with a spoon.
Yeah.
So kind of touching on that a little bit, I've heard from many people that kind of discuss whether a game system itself is too complex for beginners. I think attention span is probably a bigger factor kind of in deciding which game is going to be right for a particular table. But are there other considerations that you think that need to be made when kind of settling on a particular system?
Yeah, I mean, I think also attention span is huge. I see that big time between, you know, my 7-year-old has ADD, and he just has real trouble sitting still. So something like No Thank You Evil is much, it's kind of keeps it kind of popping, and he's got, I don't know. And just shorter sessions. But shorter sessions are huge for him. It's like an hour is good. 1 hour, you know. My 7-year-old, my 10-year-old can handle a little longer, 2 hours maybe. But then systems, I think you also have to consider how mature you want the content to be, because D&D does lend itself to hack and slash, you know, action. What does the game itself say? Like ages 14 and up or 10 and up. I don't remember what the game itself says.
I don't even know. The book is out of my reach at the moment.
I'm gonna check because I got.
Yeah. But I mean, you're absolutely right.
One second, I can't hear you.
Okay.
I had to take my headphones out.
Yeah, sure thing.
What were you saying?
Absolutely. I think the game is absolutely geared towards combat and towards solving your problems with violence, which is not necessarily something you want to impart on children. Or if you're going to, you need to make sure that there's a very clear distinction between what happens at the table and, things you expect from real life.
Yes. Yeah, no, that's true. Ages 12 plus in the Essentials kit. So,
there you go.
And I think that the Essentials kit is a little more kid friendly, I find, than a lot of the other adventures will be. And they're actually, I think it's good for all people, but there's actually some parts of the adventure where it's like, you don't need any combat really in this dungeon, and that's kind of cool. Creative problem solving. But, there's the dogs. Mine will be joining in the chorus soon. The RPG system, like No Thank You Evil, is especially great for my 4-year-old girl. She's almost 5. She can play that, and whereas D&D, I do feel a little bit let's go kill some goblins. 4-year-old, it's I don't know, not so. It's not so bad, and you can still make it work. Hey, you knock the goblins out, or the goblins run away, or whatever, and the goblins have sticks they're hitting you with, or they're throwing pine cones at you, whatever. You can make it work, but I think that is the level of violence and other mature content is definitely something to consider. That you can always change in a system, but some systems just make it it's out of the box. No, this is just whimsical and fun for young kids.
Yeah, I would have to agree. And I think a lot of times, even when you're just reading through a rule book for any system, it should be rather apparent kind of what its demographic is considered, kind of where it's aimed. Not even just through the use of profane language or anything, but just word choices and the kinds of concepts that they're discussing in the book. In a game that's squarely aimed for adults, chances are that there's probably something in there that is going to be too much for young kids to take.
Yeah.
So I think it's a good consideration to kind of flip through the book and kind of get a feeling for what you might be getting into.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Awesome. Well, we have some questions coming in from the audience, so we'll go ahead and address one of those. We have the Wonder Boy 420. He has the question of, what influence do you use to create a campaign or a setting, etc.?
Yeah. Man. First off, hi, Bruce. He's one of my patrons. Thanks for joining us. I think for me, it's it's definitely a lot of existing fiction that influences me. And I think because I am fairly new, I'm pretty impressionable when it comes to my DMs as well, because I'm learning from them. So I'm learning from Matt Click or from Juice or from other Tim or other DMs, and those tend to shape the way I play, my style and my style of DM and my flavor of fantasy for a setting as well. But I definitely think existing works of fiction are great places to draw inspiration. TV shows I'm watching. I've been watching a lot. I watched Vikings last year. Game of Thrones. I watched. Now I'm watching another Viking show. What is it called? The Last Kingdom. Yeah. But certainly other shows too that are more modern, even modern movies. I remember Matt Click basing one episode of The Provokers on a scene from Saving Private Ryan. Hey, get inspiration from all kinds of places. Yeah. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, I wholeheartedly agree. I think if you're not paying attention to game masters that you're playing under and learning things that you like about their style and adopting it to yourself, and learning, even more importantly, perhaps, things about their style that you don't care for, to make sure that you don't do, that you avoid. I think if you're not doing that, then you're failing yourself as a game master. Because I certainly have learned most of the things that I do, that I think I do well, from other dungeon masters and game masters that I've played under. It's something you should constantly be at least aware of, if not actively paying attention to. But as far as inspiration, it can come from anything. A billboard that you pass on the freeway, a commercial you hear on the radio, something that somebody says to you in a particular way, a little bit of, like, for me, I read a lot of Wikipedia entries. Whenever I think of something, I'm like, I wonder why, how did I don't know, how did Marcus Aurelius die? I know the name, I know some of the things that happened in his life, but I don't know how he died. I'll just go and look it up and just read. And I end up finding a ton of inspiration that way, because there's hardly anything in the world that's better for inspiration than history and mythology, especially for Dungeons and Dragons. And those things are ripe with low-hanging fruit for you to go and get. And a lot of it people haven't even heard of, which is fantastic.
Yep.
But I also watch a ton of movies and TV shows. I've always been a big fan of watching movies and stuff ever since I was a kid. I actually have a video on the channel all about doing that. It's called I call it steeping. So like right now I'm planning a Greco-Roman themed campaign for my home group. That will be the next main campaign that I run. So I'm going back and rewatching Gladiator and Rome and Spartacus and just anything I can get my hands on that's Greek or Roman themed, and just steeping myself as deep as I can into it. That way I understand things about their costumes, their architecture, the way they speak to each other, when they're saying these particular terms, what it actually means. It helps me a lot kind of find the feel and the flavor of a particular setting a lot.
Yep, for sure. That's great.
Awesome. Good question, Bruce. Thank you. Mm-hmm. All right. We have another question from Mike G. He says, would you suggest Theater of the Mind or more heavy on minis and a hex or grid map for newer players?
Yeah, I've found that sometimes I've wanted to introduce the game without maps and minis, that usually my players kind of are like, can we, they ask for it. They want maps and minis in general. That's just my experience with playing with new players. And that can be very simple. You can just be like coins on a battle mat, or even just coins on a table that you're just kind of moving around just to show positioning, right? Just to kind of, so yeah. But I do appreciate that actually Wizards of the Coast in the new 5e boxes didn't include that stuff, because it keeps the cost down, and it shows, and the barrier of entry for equipment is just like very low. You don't need that stuff, and we're just sitting around telling stories together and playing a fun game, and you don't need it. So I do enjoy kind of trying to encourage people just to think with their imagination more and be more imaginative, but I often do find that players want, and especially if they're reluctant players, that can be a way, it can kind of be an icebreaker almost, where it's like, oh yeah, so we're just moving our things around here, and okay, cool. It's like I can relate to this. Whereas if they've never played an RPG before, and you're just like, I just got a character sheet and some dice, and he's talking in some funny voices, what's going on here? It can be anyway, so the maps and minis can be a way to draw new players in and be an icebreaker, but there's I don't know if I have one particular recommendation, but what about you? When you played when you were young, did you have maps and minis?
No, not at all.
Yeah.
It wasn't until I started running my own group at home that I started using miniatures, and that was largely just because I wanted an excuse to start painting them, because I've always been into that kind of stuff, model making, crafting. Growing up, I played with a lot of action figures. I grew up in the 80s, so He-Man, Ninja Turtles, G.I. Joe, I mean, you name it, Transformers. So I grew up in the era of having toys that had little figures, and the big, awesome thing was the large play sets that you could get, Castle Grayskull or the battleship that G.I. Joe had. And having those things were pure imagination fuel as a kid. I could see so much possibility in these little plastic toys. And I think I carried a lot of that into my imagining as an adult. And so I don't have to have them by any stretch of the imagination. I enjoy theater of the mind play. But having a physical representation of things on the table is immediate immersion for me. I can look at a room and say, okay, cool. I see what's going on here. There's a fireplace in the corner, so there's got to be like a hot poker. So now all of a sudden possibilities are born that I wouldn't ever have thought of otherwise. Yeah. Now, I think for some people too, miniatures give you something to focus on instead of having to focus on the other people at the table. Because a lot of people feel very uncomfortable, especially when they're first beginning. Role-playing is a really uncomfortable thing for a lot of people. So I think that kind of gives you another focal point. Mm-hmm. And like you said, I think it's a bridge to board gaming and things that they can relate to. So yeah, ultimately, I think it probably depends on your style as a GM, like how you best jam and the group of people that you're playing with.
Yep, well said.
Thank you. Let's see. I think that does it on questions from the chat for the moment. So we'll bounce back over to my notes. One other question for you, and we had talked about it a little bit, that you are a teacher. What grade and subject teach?
So I teach high school, and I generally do U.S. government, U.S. history. Those are 10th and 11th grade. And sometimes I'll do a class called Global Issues. And I'm hoping to get into teaching video production. So that might be coming next year. That's
awesome, man.
And I also do tech work at the school. So I teach part-time, and I'm a tech coach. So it's mostly involves helping other teachers with technology and leading professional development, but sometimes working with students too. Yeah.
That's cool as hell. It makes a lot of sense for the things that you've excelled at outside of your career. It's still your career, technically. It's just...
Yeah, kind of. Hobby turning into career.
Yeah, exactly, which is fantastic, man. Those of you who are able to make this work, I envy beyond belief. It's awesome. And I know that it's a ton of work, way more than any of us ever see. But it's pretty damn impressive, honestly.
Yeah, thanks. It's getting there.
Hey, man, I'd say you've made it. So through some of the things that I've seen you post on Facebook and stuff, it looks like you also run a D&D club at your school.
Yeah, so I don't run it, and I'm actually not very involved in it. I wish I could be more involved, but so what I've done is I have done a class on tabletop RPGs for our winterim. This is a 2-week course, like a January term. A lot of colleges will have a 3 or 4 week January term. We at the high school just have 2 weeks. And our middle school actually has 1 week, thing they call I Explore. So with our program, we are encouraged to do classes that we would never be able to offer normally. And so the first class I ever did was called Video Games, History and Critical Thinking. And it was all about video games and just kind of going through the history of video games. but approaching them always from kind of an academic standpoint. Yes, we would get hands-on time with video games and play and share some of our favorites and kind of do show and tell presentations. I mean, group presentations, and but we go through the history and all. Anyway, lots of really fun stuff and just kind of critical thinking topics, talking about, you know, the rise of microtransactions or free-to-play games, or, you know, and just kind of discussing some of the pros and cons and how we approach gaming. And now I do a very similar thing with tabletop RPGs. I've done that 3 or 4 times now. So that is my main contact point with students and playing RPGs with them, and helping them learn new systems. And we play D&D 5e, but I also usually try to do 2 other systems that we try, and that's been really great. And then the kids, you know, a student came to me a few years back saying, "Hey, I know you do this D&D thing. Could you start a club?" And it's like, the reality is, like, I can't, because I leave right after school, and my kids, I have young kids, so I'm picking up from school most days because my wife works, and I got to get dinner ready and yada yada. So it's pretty hard for me to see them playing and not be involved, but they know I'm supportive, and I get involved in all of their conversations, and I'm, you know, yeah, the leader, the staff leader is a really good friend of mine on staff. So yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's difficult to hear people talking about it, if you want, in the wild, and not butt in.
Mm-hmm.
So what methods do you think have transferred from the classroom to the gaming table?
The classroom to the gaming table. Honestly, I feel like I have a kind of a good sense. You get this kind of skill or sense of, like, when people are with you or when they're not. Now, if you ask my students, they might say, "Man, sometimes he just talks and he doesn't get it. No one's with him." But I do get it. I just have to fake it till I make it. I know you're not with me sometimes. I can feel the vibe. So yeah, I mean, there's that kind of, like, feeling like in control or out of control, and being able to sense when that's happening, both in the classroom and at the table. Honestly, I feel like more than teaching or DMing, I honestly think that making videos and watching my videos over and over again and reflecting on how I sound on camera and microphone and all this has improved both my DMing and my teaching more than either of those things have crossed over, which is kind of interesting. Just feeling more confident and yeah, I don't know. There's just kind of having that presence, maybe, that people have told me I have, that I don't think I had in my early videos. If you go back and watch, like, and I'll probably look back on videos I'm making now in 5 years and be like, man. But anyway, that's just some thought on that. Yeah, I don't know. Can you ask the question again?
Yeah, sure. So, like, what ways do you think, what methods from teaching have impacted your behavior, either as a GM or as a player at the table?
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely getting players involved. I mean, I think teachers have to do that. It can't be a one-way street. So yeah, my tolerance for long exposition is pretty low as a DM. Like, I don't tolerate much of that for myself. As a player, like, I'm pretty good with it. I'm used to. I thrived in academic environments. I was a good student. Although I definitely think I have some signs of ADD, and I'm actually still, like, today as a 37-year-old, like thinking, I think I might want to talk to my doctor about meds. But so there is that. But I feel like as a DM, I'm sensitive to long exposition. I want to keep things moving, and I do the same thing in class. I realize definitely, like, as a teacher, I know there are lessons where I'm like, this lesson, I talk too much. I gotta find something to do to break it up, and get students involved and active in their learning, because yeah, it's hard when you got a lot of content to cover. It takes creativity. But that's something I definitely try to think about in my DMing too, is like, how can I get it? Oh, and a variety of things, that we're not always doing the same thing. I'm not going to lecture and now you do your reading. I do that a lot as a teacher, but it's something that I'm aware, like, I could do better, and I try to switch things up. And as a DM too, I think, finding ways that you're gonna be doing a skill check here, and then a social encounter, and then some combat, and then we're gonna be doing some exploration, and trying to include a variety of things to kind of keep the pace, keep it popping.
Yeah, I can see that. I haven't done any teaching, at least not in any kind of professional capacity, but being able to read the temperature of a table and understand kind of the psychology of kind of what's going on and how to manipulate that. It's a bad phrase, but that's basically what's happening.
Totally.
I think that's a crucial skill for a game master, being able to understand when you've hit ice and you need to stop and back up and find a different route. Or when something is on fire and you just keep going with it, just make it last as long as you can.
Yeah,
I think those are important skills to have, and I think, yeah, finding interesting ways to change things up, not to subvert expectations just for the sake of subverting expectations, but to do it when it needs to be done. When you've had 2 combats in this session already, throwing something that the characters who aren't combat focused can now do, and kind of continually spinning plates effectively. As a GM, that's kind of what you're doing anyways. You're constantly having to make sure that all of these different things are going all at once and that nothing falls off. And I think making sure that each player type, as well as each character type that's sitting at the table, has something that's engaging, is a very important thing to do.
Yeah, and that's a real challenge in games where people are pretty different, and it's always a challenge in a classroom. So yeah.
Okay, so we have another question from the audience, but before we get to that, I had a second follow-up question to that question that we were just talking about. So now if we take the reverse, and you may not have anything specific, but is there anything that you can think of that gaming in particular has helped with your teaching?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. There must be.
Yes.
I think, my ability to engage. We actually do in social studies, we do simulations. And one of the first simulations I did, actually, we used a D20. It was a feudalism simulation. And we rolled to see, what the result of the year was. Basically, it was usually like how many family members died of what thing. So that was fun.
Sounds like it.
Students really enjoyed that, and I lost 2 kids this year to the plague. Oh yeah, well I lost 3 to starvation, and it's just like, man, it was brutal. Our feudal simulation. So my ability to engage in those, I think, I feel like I'm better at that now, for sure. In terms of trying to get that immersion. Yeah, so we do a fair amount of those. I did 2 in the last 2 weeks, simulations, and they're not always big class period long things, but short ones. And then I think also just trying to be more expressive, even when I'm reading to my class. I've got a quote from someone that we're going to read real quick, or here's what historian so and so says about this. I feel like I'm just more expressive now. I feel like, and again, that's probably more from my videos than just from DMing, but I really, yeah. And here's another one that kind of, it goes both ways. The catchy opener. The catchy opener is really valuable in teaching, and it's valuable at the table. I love, just narrating a quick scene that's just like, what's going on here, sort of stuff in a RPG session that, and then in the classroom too, just kind of having he's asking us what, what does that have to do with anything? You'll see. So yeah.
Yeah, I really enjoy lead-in paragraphs that make that transition from we're gathered around the table, we're catching up, socializing, getting snacks and drinks, to now this has started and we're shifting gears now. So by the time that this little introduction paragraph or whatever is finished, everybody's hopefully kind of in the right mindset and ready to kick ass. So I imagine that you'd have a very similar situation in a classroom. You're coming between periods, students are settling in, they're all catching up with one another. None of them really usually want to be there, and they don't want to, do whatever, in their minds is boring. So I would imagine having, again, this kind of shift of gears. That's one of the best pieces of advice that I got concerning this particular aspect is repetition, is finding a method that you like, that makes that transition clear and apparent, and do it every single time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. I think that's good.
Awesome. Okay. So on to that question from What You Looking At. That's Josh.
Hey, Josh.
His question is, do you think that teaching TTRPGs to high schoolers has helped with their creativity in other areas, such as writing, etc.?
I mean, I would like to think so. Yeah, I don't necessarily get to witness much of that, I don't think, but yeah, I think I know of one case where a student has just told me like what a difference that class made in their life. And there are probably others. But I did have one student this past summer just, tell me straight up like that was huge, getting into RPGs for my confidence, just in who I am. And that was really cool to hear. So may not be a practical skill like writing or problem solving, but I think RPGs do those things as well. But in this case, it was just confidence. And I can say the same thing that I've experienced. I just feel like I'm more confident in who I am. Yeah, that was pretty cool to hear.
Man, I can only imagine. Even just having one probably makes all of the effort feel worthwhile.
Yeah.
I know as a dungeon master, having even just one player after a session say, that was amazing. And not just, that was neat, or I had a great time. That's also really kind and it's endearing. But to have that one person look at you right in the eye and say, no, like that really was awesome. Like, thank you for that.
Yeah.
It makes all of the hours of toiling over Wikipedia articles or whatever else completely and totally worth it.
Yeah.
And I can say from my own point of view, since I learned playing the game from the point of being a teenager onward, that it absolutely helps in creativity and in many other ways. And it actually brings me to one of my other points that I wanted to talk about. Something that I've talked about a lot on the channel, and it's because it's something that I really believe in. And that's the positive skills that role-playing games can develop within players: math, problem solving, social skills, critical thinking, comprehensive reading, therapeutic practice, release of emotions, etc., etc. But when you're bringing new people into the hobby, do these things need to be at the forefront of your mind as the person who's teaching them how to play, or are they simply natural byproducts of what we do?
I think that there's certainly things I'm conscious of when I'm teaching to teenagers, to young players in general. I don't think we need to be that aware of them. I do think that they just, it's natural. And part of it depends on your play style too, and your DMing style. Some games will teach certain things better than others. Some games, are just, we delve the dungeon like you were talking about earlier, and we get the loot, and that's fun. It's still valuable. Yeah, there are other things that I do think come along with it that are really powerful, can shape us. I recently heard, so I watch a lot of Matt Colville's videos. I really like him. I don't agree with him on everything, and when I watch his games, I don't care for his DMing style as much as I do others, but I really respect that there's different styles out there and that he's making his known, and I really appreciate a lot of his thoughts on things. So one of the things he said recently was in a video on role playing, which I loved. It was a great video. Was this idea of RPGs teaching empathy, and how actually, like, he doesn't see it. Like, there are people who are dicks who play D&D and RPGs, and they will continue to not empathize as long as they play this game. They're bad people who, unsympathetic jerks who play D&D, and that will continue to be the case, and D&D will not change that about them. I thought that was interesting to think about. But I think there is that potential there for sure. And here's something that's cool. When you're in a place like a D&D club, or whether that's in a community center, or there's an adult parent who's running a game for kids, I think it's great that kids run games for each other. I think that's awesome. But there is so much value in being kind of like letting your DMing, or even just playing as a player, but being an adult presence there with a bunch of young people as a mentor that gives you that ability to teach those things, and to say, rather than just like, whoa, things are falling apart here in this group, like so-and-so doesn't want to play anymore and they're mad at so-and-so. No, the adult in the room can be the adult in the room and help the group work through that, and say, like, let's communicate here. Like, what is happening? What is he doing that's bugging you? And you can have those conversations in private, and then say, well, how can we address that at the table? And those are so valuable. And I've seen that happen in the D&D club and the RPG club at school, that people are having tough conversations that they wouldn't normally have, I don't think, if they weren't playing RPGs. It's the social stuff you were talking about, where it's like, man, we don't really get along that well, and how the way you play is very different from the way I play, and dynamics.
Yeah, even something as simple as taking turns, of knowing when it's your turn to be quiet and fall into the background and let somebody else shine, have their turn, or even going so far as to actually supporting and helping somebody else have their moment. There's a lot of adults that don't know that lesson. But just like the note about, people who are dicks in life, can be dicks at the table. It's absolutely true. I think that anything, but RPGs certainly no exception. It's only going to teach you what you're receptive to. Like if you're paying attention and you're willing to learn and how to improve yourself in the ways that the game is offering to teach you, I think they're absolutely at your fingertips. I know, like when we moved from a more urban area to a more rural area, and whenever I was 13, so I went from a school that was not doing pre-algebra to a grade that was doing algebra. So I skipped completely over pre-algebra, and it screwed me up bad. It was very, very tough. So I got put into like a program, almost like Sylvan Learning, where it's just like super repetition. It's all stopwatch, like worksheets and stuff. And I was a 13, 14-year-old kid sitting in a room where all the desks were made for like 7 and 8-year-olds. I was like, there's something wrong with me. Like I don't know what I'm doing. I have some kind of dysfunction. And it took a long time to wrestle with the fact that I really didn't. I just missed out on a year of schooling that was, imperative. But I also started playing Dungeons and Dragons at the same time. And even though Dungeons and Dragons will not teach you algebra, it does sharpen the hell out of your arithmetic skills, which you need as a basis for doing algebra. So it ended up helping me immensely in that category. Not to mention it's all the social stuff and confidence stuff that also comes along with it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of that. I really agree with your point about, what you're open to. There's potential there for this hobby to teach those things. And a lot of it's what you're open to. And a lot of it's probably also who you're playing with. A lot of times you learn these things alongside other people because of the way they act or the way, the way they approach it. And I think that's really big too. Who you're playing with.
Yeah, I think that's a lesson that can actually be applied to a much broader spectrum. The people that you're around end up influencing your behavior a lot more than you might give it credit for. Mm-hmm. If you're spending time with people who are bad influences, whether at the table or away, it's going to shift your behavior and your choices. And role-playing games, while they are a game of pretend, where you're all sitting around a table, throwing funny plastic shapes across the table at each other, when you are in a good game, the memories that you forge in that game are sometimes difficult to completely divorce from being reality. Mm-hmm. You can think back to a situation and it's not, oh, do you remember that time that my dwarven, rogue was hanging off the edge of a cliff and you came over? It's no, do you remember that time that I was hanging off of the cliff and you came over and saved my ass at the last second and you almost died too? And then you forge these war stories, if you will, with the people that you game with. And so the more time that you're spending with these people, the more you are having in common with them. Mm-hmm. And if you're teaching each other good things, then that's fantastic because that's mm-hmm. growth for both of you. But if you're constantly cycling and circling around not so great ideas or mm-hmm. habits, that's going to take root too. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think I definitely talk about that a lot with students and with video games too. This notion that, what we do in game does not affect us. And I think it's BS. It does. I mean, if your player, if your character betrays me and backstabs me, like, I will be pissed at you, Jeremy. Like, there's, it doesn't work that way. I'm sorry. Like, and if I'm mature and it's done well in the game table, like, I'll get over it and I'll realize, man, and it will contribute to a good story, perhaps. And so you got to weigh that. Like, I'm not saying it's always a bad idea to have any like betrayal or like things like that. I think it can be awesome, but my point is, it affects us, the good and the bad. So yeah, I think the notion that I've heard it called like the magic circle. No, games are a magic circle. What happens in the game does not affect us. It takes away from the power that these games can have, both good and bad.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of thinking about it. There's definitely things that I can really get amped up about and into at the table, and then when I stand up from the table, it's gone. Like I drop it. But it's the habit. It's when it becomes regular or normal. Mm-hmm. That's the thing that starts to become an issue, I think.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, so we have another question from Jason, a good friend of mine, and
what's up, Jason?
Common viewer here on the channel. His question is, how do you encourage your younger players to participate in the world building at the table? How do you get them to insert their own unique ideas to the story?
Yeah, that's I think it's going to come really naturally for some people. Some kids are just gonna kind of spurt out like, well, what if there's this thing? And you're like, yes, there is, Or my son, who's not satisfied with the character options, is like, nope, I want to be a zombie ninja. It's like, yes, you will be a zombie ninja. Yes. And so some of that's, I think, natural, and it's beautiful, and there's that, just that creativity that kids have. It's just like, just go for it, man. When my son first started playing, he didn't know a lot of the terminology of dungeon master or game master or whatever like that. He just said, after I ran a game for him, he said, "Dad, next time I want to be the one. I want to be the one to draw the maps." It's like, oh, okay. So he's saying he wants to run the game. It's kind of what he's saying, It's like, all right, here's the marker, and he did something, it was cool. He was like 7, 6. So yeah, I think that some of that's just natural, but yeah, it for some kids, I think too, they're too much in the mindset of like, or young players, that this is a game, and I'm just thinking about the mechanics and how much, kill more monsters, get more stuff, and so getting them to contribute to the world building can be a bit of a challenge. But I think I don't know if I have any specific tips to young people that I wouldn't also give to older players too. It's just like, no, just try. Tell me about your, what village do you come from? Here's the map. What did your parents do for work? And not overwhelming them with questions, but asking once in a while. Little tidbits. What about you? What do you think?
Yeah, I think it mainly depends on the player. There are some people, even as adults, that I know that are uncomfortable when they're put on the spot that way. It's just not the way they prefer to play the game, which is perfectly fine. But I think, like you said, I think making certain that you are a conduit to receive that when they're willing to give it. So showing them that not only is it okay to come up with unorthodox ideas and throw them at you, but that you're going to take those and knead those into the dough of kind of what you're working on. That allows them the freedom to see what they're doing in action, to say, oh, okay, what I'm coming up with becomes a part of what we're doing. Mm-hmm. And some people get that power and they're like, okay, now I'm off the rails. I'm going to throw everything at you, which can be bad if it goes too far the other direction. But that's just, when you start to rein it in as a DM. But I think showing the players that you're willing to take what they're giving to you and work with it is a really key part of encouraging that behavior.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Okay. Just a couple more things that I want to try to get through. So one of the preloaded questions that we got was from actually Matt Click. He asks, how do you go about introducing younger gamers to the sometimes arcane mechanics of RPGs? I think he might have meant archaic.
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, I think making it light is important, and so just skipping over some things. But ultimately, I mean, I think a lot of it is similar to what you would do with older players again, where, excuse me, you just got to ask them, what do you do? What does your character do? And the mechanics don't matter at that point. It's like, I'll roll the dice for you. I don't know. Like, just tell me what your character would do. And once you do that, we figure out what to roll. And with a younger player, I have their character sheet right next to me. They're sitting right next to me, maybe, and I'm just going, okay, so you roll your d20, and then you add athletics or whatever. And I point to where athletics is, and they have +3 there, and they roll, and they add the 3, and they're practicing math, and it's great. And you know, so I think that you just have to do a lot more hand holding, even getting into, you know, maybe you've played 10 times and you're still going to be doing that. Whereas with an older player, you can kind of say like, all right, give me an athletics check. And they're like, all right, I played 10 times. I got this, you know? So yeah, I think it's just a little more hand holding, and then also just being willing to like skip and cut some things. And then we kind of already talked about it, but finding a rule system that might be a little simpler. It's not a bad thing.
Yeah, I would agree. And if you insist on running, you know, a game system that's more complex because, you know, that's the one you're comfortable with or what have you, that's perfectly fine. But like you said, that's when you practice your hand waving, your fiat. You know, like, yeah, this is the way we technically handle grapple, but I don't want to do that right now. I don't think that they're on board for the explanation behind that. You know, so this is how we're going to handle this now. And just, you know, make it known that, hey, we're going to be kind of calling this as we go, kind of on the fly. We're just going to be doing whatever makes sense in the moment. You know, these rules are great guidelines, and that's just exactly what they are. And, you know, we'll go to them if we need them. Awesome. So another question that was preloaded is from, I always mess up his name whenever I go to say it, Caius Wallen. And it's how important, and I'm paraphrasing mildly here, how important is it to learn the rules to play a game? Can you role play without knowing the rules, just by reacting and relying on the GM to tell you what you need to do? A little bit of this we just kind of touched on. But if you don't know the rules, you have a limited understanding of the world that you're playing in, and may be limited in how well you can immerse yourself. Do you think there are games where the experience is better if you don't know the rules?
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely one of the reasons I enjoy playing with new players is sometimes that out of the box thinking that comes from not knowing the rules. Being willing to, you know, sometimes it could go both ways. Sometimes the new players will be like, well, I guess we just kill everything. But at the same time, I've definitely had new players that are like, I don't want to kill these goblins. Like, let's try to talk to them, you know, more so than probably more experienced players. And so that lack of knowledge of the rules, or no, I don't want to. No, let's not get weapons involved here. I've got a rope. Let's try to lasso one. And when that happened in my very first Pathfinder game that I ever ran, it was like, I didn't know how to run games at that point. Just like, I don't really know how to do that. So like, can you just like hit the goblin? One of my finest. Yeah, I mean, that was my new DM experience. It was just like, oh man, I really missed an opportunity there to show that player how an RPG you can do anything and be creative. But anyway, yeah. So I think there's that fresh perspective that can benefit. That can be a benefit of not knowing the rules. And I do think that, yes, as we talked about before, absolutely players can play without any knowledge of the rules. A little bit can help, you know, in terms of surviving better. It can be helpful if you know how to use your second wind, or these other abilities, right? Sneak attack, and like just remembering that stuff can help you mechanically survive and succeed. But yeah, it's totally doable if you don't know the rules.
Absolutely.
Now, what do you think? Have you ever, do you agree with what I'm saying about like new players and how they can kind of, I don't know. Have you had that?
I mean, to some extent, yeah. I would argue that you didn't miss an opportunity, though, because you're still talking about it now, which means that you're cognizant of what happened, and you're probably going to try to avoid doing so again. So there was actually an opportunity that was gained in that situation.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of freedom that comes from not being boxed in by the rules, for sure. And a lot of new players, once they kind of get the idea that, oh, I can try to do anything. I had a player one time who was very new that was playing with us as a table of seasoned players. She was, I think this was like her first, maybe second game that she'd ever played. And she ended up running up a chain that was attached to the monster to get onto it. And one of the other players who'd been playing for probably 2 or 3 years looked at me and said, "She can do that?" It's like, yeah, like, of course. Why not? She'll have to make a roll to see if she's able to, balance or whatever. And, there's going to be a risk and failure portion of that, but absolutely she can attempt it. Why not? And I think there's a lot of, like you said, a lot of veteran players that get caught in that loop of, here's what my character can do. It says it on the page right here. Therefore, when it comes to my turn, this is what I'm going to do. And that's all that they ever do with their character. And it's a shame.
Yep, absolutely. And I've heard similar stories from other DMs, for sure. Friends of mine who just, man, get beyond your character's abilities and just tell me what you would do.
Yep.
Think in character and be creative. And yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. There's another question from Tamiko. Her question is, do you think that it's more important when teaching someone an RPG to focus on the rules or the fun as a base first, and why?
Yeah. Hi, Tamiko. I think in general, fun is, going to be the focus. But I mean, there are players who just, those sickos who just want to sit down with a rule book. And I think some of us are those sickos. And just like really get into it. So it's not a one size fits all thing, but definitely, I mean, I think it's, for most people, coming to a tabletop RPG and seeing one of these books right here, like, is intimidating. It was intimidating for me.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of veteran players don't get that.
Yeah. When I get a new RPG book, I'm still intimidated by it.
Yeah.
I don't sit down and read an entire RPG book. I don't have that kind of time and focus, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah.
I use them like an encyclopedia or a dictionary. They're a resource material.
Yeah.
Where I'm like, oh, wait a second. I have a book that has something like that in it. I'll go to the shelf and look at it then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's one of the reasons I'm a really big fan of like starter sets and beginner boxes and all that stuff. Because it's just a little more approachable way of like, we're taking some of the rules here and we're going to stagger them and present them in a way that's beginner friendly, because it can be intimidating. So yeah, I got the Numenera book and I was just like, ooh, I mean, it's D20 system. It wouldn't be that hard. I would probably be fine. But just to making me feel a little more comfortable, I also got the box set. And I was like, okay, yeah, this is cool. I can do this.
You got to learn how to walk before you can run.
Yeah.
But yeah, as a point to Miko's question, I don't think that I don't think there has to be a difference between rules and fun. I think
I
you
like
can play a game that is very rules heavy and still have a lot of fun, especially with, like you said, the right group of players. It all comes down to, truth be told, most of the advice that you're going to hear in videos like this on any channel, it all comes down to the makeup at the table, the players and the person running the game.
Yep.
There's
Yep.
no,
And in terms of rules, it's fun. We go back to character creation. Like some people, they're like, I just want to get to the game. And pre-gens are great for that. And that's definitely a valid way of thinking about it. But for other people, like, man, for a lot of us, character creation is super fun. It's a great part of the game. And even kids love creating their own character. You know, pick a name and a race, and you know, maybe you get a companion animal if you're, I don't know.
most of the video games that I'm drawn to are the ones where I'm like, oh, there's a character creation part where I can like adjust the size of my nose, and like I'll spend like 2.5 hours just building my character for Skyrim.
Totally. And then, you know, do I want two-handed weapon mastery, or do I want, you know, I want to be an archer? And just
you break out the pad of paper and you're like, okay, how is this tree gonna affect me down the road?
Yep.
Awesome. Okay. Just a couple more things that I want to touch on. One being, role playing is very strange and uncomfortable for most adults. It's a hard headspace to get into for people. And I think the capacity for playing pretend in general is often discouraged past childhood, at least in our current society. So what are some ways that you might be able to teach that aspect of the game to new players to kind of ease them into the deep end, as it were?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I used to think that, no, you just got to go for it and show them it's okay. But that can turn some players off. It can, if you're like going gonzo role player, getting into character and being crazy and wild. It can. That's just a reality. So, yep, I think it's definitely finding that balance of like demonstrating as a DM that like, this is kind of silly, and I'm gonna get into character, and you know, and ham it up a little bit, and and just showing that you're comfortable with that without going overboard and demanding it from them. But lead by example, and then I think also just trying to find your preferred style. It's not always more role playing, and more in character does not equal better. And I think that a lot of us who do the stuff we do, we're very theatrical, you know, people, and I think you know, a lot of us come from the RPG brigade or the absolute tabletop community, where it's just like that's just the culture of the way that games played, but it's not necessarily the only way. And but yeah, I still think there is some element, even in a not very RP heavy, of that kind of like, this is a little bit, we're still playing pretend here. So easing them into that and just showing them that you're having fun with it. I don't know. Do you have any tips for that, Jeremy?
Yeah, I mean, I am definitely ready and willing to dive into a really intense, emotional, heavy role-playing scene with people who are comfortable with keeping pace with that. I enjoy it a lot. I have a theater background, and I enjoy improvisation a lot. So it's an aspect of the game that I really, really like doing. But my home group is actually really not all that comfortable with heavy role play. We might have, a little bit of role play here or there. But once it really starts to kind of heighten in emotions, everybody kind of starts to withdraw a little. It's obvious that it starts to make some people very uncomfortable at the table. So we don't tend towards that style of play very often. It comes up occasionally, but not very often. We do a lot more tactical miniatures and terrain, a lot more story development, where there's just not as much call for really strong, heavy emotions in a lot of the scenes that we play. And I enjoy both of them equally. They both scratch a slightly different itch that I have. And I'm very, very thankful and glad that I'm able to experience both kinds of role playing and enjoy both of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. So I have one more question that I want to ask you, Nate. And it's perhaps the one thing that you are the most known for within the community are the immaculate maps that you draw. How exactly did this in particular come about? And what is the story behind how this caught on so well?
Yeah. So it all started with Questing Beast. Any nominated Questing Beast. He was nominated for an Emmy this year. Ben Milton over at Questing Beast, who I've now got to meet in person at Gen Con and hung out with him, which was super cool. I watched some of his map drawing videos back in the day. He now does mostly OSR and indie RPG reviews, but back then he did a lot more mapping, and his maps looked nice, and he would draw them on camera and stuff, and talk about commissions or ones he was doing for friends or whatever. And I decided to follow along with some of his tutorials and do my own take. So I turned on the camera and said, I'm gonna try drawing a map. Here goes. And I also started looking at other folks. Another big influence was Fantastic Maps. I think he's one of the guys who does. He's done some of the, or maybe the Westeros map, or the known world for the Song of Ice and Fire. And he's got a website with tutorials and stuff too. And there were a couple others that kind of caught on as early influence for me. But yeah, I just turned on the camera and it did pretty well. And being someone who wanted to grow my YouTube channel, when something does well, I repeat. And I think that's natural too, even if you're not looking at making a career of it. For a lot of us, we've done things that we just feel like, yeah, I enjoy this, but it's not really doing that well, and you wonder if it's worth it. And so when something does, it's like, oh, people like this. And I've always liked to doodle. I've never, I thought about going to school for graphic design when I was a senior in high school. I've always just loved art and drawing, so there was a natural fit there. But I've very little actual training. Like my art classes, if my art teacher's watching this, I'm sorry, but our art classes were not good. At my tiny little private school that I went to, 26 kids in my graduating class. Yeah, I did not receive much formal training, and I wish I had so badly. That's one of the things. I had actually pretty good middle school art classes, but went to a bigger public school for that. Anyway, that's a bit of that. And then yeah, I just kept making the videos, and then that was only a matter of time before people asked me to make maps for them. So I remember I made one for Juice. He was my DM at the time, and then from there, a couple other people asked me, and then eventually, like the guys at Absolute Tabletop asked me to make the Aeronaut map, which I've got on the wall up there. And things kind of snowballed from there. And nowadays, I'm actually taking a step back from commissions. I'm closed for commissions. I still got a couple that I'm like picking away at, finishing up. And I probably will do a couple a year where it's just like, hey, yeah, I'll draw you a map, but I'm going to charge you a lot of money, and I'm going to, and it'll be done when it's done. Deal with it. And that's just, I guess, one of the advantages that I have. That might sound conceited, but I really am trying to focus more on the YouTube channel and growing that, and just not get too divided. So I still enjoy maps. That was a long answer.
Oh, no, that's a fantastic answer. So if we can get a peek under the hood, what might be next for the channel?
Well, I will continue to do map drawing videos occasionally. for sure. And for my patrons, I do like a weekly map drawing stream. So that's one of the reasons I do want to keep commissions in the cooker, just picking away at, because it gives me something to do there. And I also am starting to do encounter maps, which are a new thing for me. So maybe I'll do some videos on that. I really do have a desire to learn how to do like town and city maps better and do some teaching videos on that. But first I need to learn how. That's a lot of my channel. It's like I'm teaching things that I just learned how to do. And yeah, because I'm pretty new to the hobby overall. But and then yeah, I mean, other than that, just plugging away. I enjoy making videos about RPGs, and I don't know where that's going to lead, but my channel is a little more kitchen sink than some other channels who kind of have their formula that they repeat. And maybe that's just my personality. Sometimes that hurts me. It hurts my growth that I'm a little more kitchen sink. There are people certainly who are attracted to that, but there are people who only come to my channel for maps, and then when I do a RPG book review, they're like, "What's this crap?" And vice versa, or painting miniatures. They're like, "I'm not interested in that. I don't even play with miniatures," or whatever it might be. But yeah, I'm being true to myself, and for now, it's a little more broad range of interests. So I'll keep on doing what I do, and yeah, there's some good stuff in store. So I have no shortage of ideas.
That's perfect, man. Well, I think the method that you have shown has proven to work. I think you are very, very successful, and with good reason. You're very, very good at getting across something that is sometimes apparent that you have just learned, but using the tips and tricks that you have just learned to start doing it to help other people start doing it.
Yeah.
I think that is a very important gap that needs to be filled in a lot of the YouTube videos that are out there, because you have a lot of people who are like, yeah, I'm a model maker. I've been making models for Weta Workshop. Here's how I do stuff. That's awesome. But if you're just starting out, that's really difficult to just go straight there. Having somebody who kind of helps you get into the new thing, teaches you where to begin, the materials you might need, all of that kind of stuff is hugely important. And it's I think you do really well.
Yeah, well, thank you. And I think that is one thing that gives me a slight advantage, is that I'm fairly new. It does help me like teach a little bit better, because I remember what it was like not too long ago to learn, and so that's one thing I always want to keep with the channel, is I want to continue to be creative about ways to make the hobby more approachable. And yeah, I'll do, advanced, mountain drawing, or, I'll do tips for DMs, and I'll do, weird thoughts, musings about some obscure topic in RPGs and stuff like that. But I do hope to keep coming back to how can I make this more approachable, this hobby. So, I imagine that'll continue to be something that it's kind of weird, because like, yeah, there's people who've been with my channel forever and they know how to play D&D, but they still tune in when I like make a new video about like beginner stuff. And I appreciate that, and we can all learn, I guess, from each other, and so anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, you can learn. If you can't learn something from someone, then you're probably just not paying attention enough, honestly. And I think that again, what you do is a very valuable service. I think it's amazing that it has done so well, and that it's continuing to do well. So
yeah, thank you. It's a lot of fun. It's something I didn't see coming, and just something I'm trying to enjoy. And it's a lot easier to enjoy with people like you and others, just how cool the community is. Just, great people. That's one of the biggest things that has been a benefit for me in getting into RPGs, it's just the people. Like, people are just amazing. It gives me a lot of hope. Yeah, what I said earlier about there will always be dicks, and that's true too. But man, I've just made so many great friends in this hobby, and it's been life changing. So.
Yeah, I could not agree more. Most of my dear friends are from gaming. A lot of the people that I game with on a weekly basis here in my home, I've known since we were teenagers. We've been playing most of the time that we've been together. We've been playing around a table, and finding online gaming has only taken my circle of really close friends and just exploded it. A lot of the people that I've met through online gaming are people that I never would have met otherwise. And they're people that I can confide in and trust and do these even emotionally heavy scenes with, and know that it's going to be okay, that I'm not going to receive some kind of harsh judgment, or at the end of it, we can all kind of sit back and go, whew, that was a lot. And oh man, how great that was, Or if I'm having a bad day, I can message them and say, man, I really need just some, encouragement to just keep pushing through. And the community, the gaming community in particular, is just absolutely rife with them. People that are intelligent and creative and supportive, and it's awesome. And I'm really thankful that starting this particular series has given me the opportunity to sit down with people, a lot of them who I've already known ahead of time, to get to know just a little bit better, or sometimes even more importantly, to get to sit down with somebody like you, who I have not had the chance to really sit down and talk with before. And now walking away from, feel like I understand you much, much better than I did before. So,
well, cool.
Thank you very, very much.
And likewise, I know we've chatted a bit here or there, seen each other around, but it's good to sit down and talk, get to know you.
Absolutely, man. I will talk shop all day long with people. I love this stuff. So thank you very much for coming on. For those of you who did not follow Nate here, go check out his channel. You should be able to find the link to his channel in the description of this video once I'm able to put in all of that information after the fact. And if you are new here, if you followed Nate over to the channel, thank you very, very much for coming and watching. Subscribe if you want. Hit the like button. Tune in for these in the future. So, Nate, do you have anything that you want to say parting-wise before we close everything up?
No, just thanks to all who asked questions and gave their ideas too in the chat. That's great. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. That makes the content fill out nice and round most of the time, because you guys can think of things to ask that I won't come up with. So, yeah, thank you very much for tuning in, everyone. Thank you, Nate, very much for coming on. And everyone, until next time, may your dice roll high and your snacks always be within reach.